tell the audience who you are. Let us know what your business is, how you make money. Let us know who your ICP is.
Got it. So I'm Jamal Marshall, executive coach, certified counselor, keynote speaker, and top podcast host. So okay, what's the next question? Because I'm never good at these. Like I'm horrible at these, to be honest.
Who you are, what you do, and who your ICP is, who your customers are.
Got it. Okay, so what I do is I primarily work in executive coaching and on the certified counseling side, because sometimes you need a little bit of both. And I have a unique modality of working with subconscious thought. A lot of quote unquote coaches work with cognitive behavioral therapy, which I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but that focuses on your behavior. So at Listen and Speak, we focus on the belief that informs your behavior. Because if you don't focus on your belief at the root, you just go in circles. And so I think talk therapy is very ineffective. I think a lot of coaches out here are taking people's money and wasting their time. But with Listen and Speak, I've worked with people from Honda, Amazon, Nike, Zillow, Comcast, just to name a few. And they say, I've been in therapy for over 15 to 20 years. How did I get results with you in 4 months? Because we focus on the root causes of the subconscious mind with a specific modality steeped in brain neuroplasticity. So that is how we get results. If the results aren't measurable, why waste your time?
I love it. So you work with people at Nike, and who else did you say? Nike, Adidas. Who else was it?
Not Adidas, Nike, Amazon, Zillow, Honda, Comcast. These are just a few small tech. If you ever heard of Carta, so because of course with tech, whether small or large, man, they have some of the most craziest stresses and anxieties, and especially in the age of AI. So you ask who the ICP is. So mostly from anywhere from middle manager to senior leader to CEO. And outside of the corporate structure or the nonprofit structure, it's going to be entrepreneurs who are actually running their own businesses.
Okay, very cool. Awesome. How did you get into this space, Jamal?
I started off actually as an addictions counselor. So I started off working in 2013. I started my education obviously in 2003. So 17 years total, experience in the field. Well, actually, no. Over 17 years, but then I started the education side. Then I started the practicum and the training, in 2013, after getting my degree, in counseling and psychology. And believe it or not, I started off as an addictions counselor. So that gave me a love for brain neuroplasticity. Like, of course, we know addiction is mental, psychological, spiritual in many aspects, but it also is neurological. And so it's like, well, what's going on in the brain that would keep someone in any sort of pattern, whether it's gambling, whether it's alcohol, drugs. People say corn. I'm sick of these little porn. I'm going to say it. Whatever. I'm just tired of all this. What do you call that stuff? The masking, and you got to say certain things.
The politically correct version.
No politically correct. When somebody says self-delete, when they commit suicide, I'm just going to say it. Leave it out if you want to. But that's the type of person you're getting when you work with me. You're not getting someone who's beating around the bush. So that was my experience there. And then tragedy struck in January 2017 when my dad had a major stroke. So I had to come back here to DC. I was actually in the Midwest, and coming back here, I was only coming back for a few weeks. There was a care package to bring him home. He got critically ill. He started recovering over the course of 8-9 months, and I got back in September. Once he got ill, 2 months we lived in a hospital, and then God called him home. That was really tragic for me because if anyone hasn't lost a parent, you just don't know. That's all I can say. That's not going to be resonant. But I went through a bit of a crisis of faith, and then I started working in investigations, anti-human trafficking, anti-human slavery. Worthy work, but definitely not work that I was designed for. I did it, because I was coming back to DC. This is Washington, D.C., baby. The bills this ain't Mississippi. So when the pandemic hit, I actually had been a person walking through the woods. I would use that as I wasn't sitting in traffic, so I had that discretionary time to actually just do hikes in the morning. So for an hour and a half, I would take that time to hike, and I would whip out my phone. I had gone through a crisis in my own faith. I'm a Christian, and I hated Jesus. I hated God. I hated the gospel. I hated it. And I said, I'm going to be an atheist. I said, this is all a bunch of hogwash. how could a God who is good let this happen to my dad? So my prayer was F-bombs, and I would just shoot F-bombs up to the sky on this empty tennis court. And then I realized in this neighborhood, I hadn't lived here for a while, but we have all these beautiful Civil War forts that stretch like 5 miles, nothing but forest. And so I said, man, deer and foxes and wild turkey, they don't speak English. So I'll just go in there and drop F-bombs. And being enclosed in nature which was so beautiful, man. Unbeknownst to me, God began to get a hold of me over the course of the better part of 9 months to a year. And then I went from profanity back to prayer. And so I would have these times of meditation, and I was on no social media. Before a minute and a half, I would whip my phone out and just express my thoughts. And I had to get a LinkedIn, because 2018, I, had to find a job. But I started placing these things on LinkedIn of all places, and people started watching my videos. And people would reach out and say, are you like some sort of counselor or mentor or advisor? And I would tell people no initially, because it's like I thought those things died with my dad. Yeah. And one group by the name of Safety Justice League reached out to me and said, hey, we want to bring you on our podcast. I was like, what? Okay. I was like, I got a full-time job, but y'all want to bring me on a podcast. So they brought me on there. And that was the beginning of the Moves. People started reaching out to me after they heard that episode. And it was a safety episode, but it was their most downloaded episode. I was unlike any other guest, so I think people heard something different. And a group in Columbia, Pennsylvania heard that episode and said, hey, we'll send you $2,000 in your mail so you can get yourself a MacBook Pro. We want to sponsor you a free web domain.
Wow.
That's when Listen Then Speak was born. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
And it was a panel interview. So you had 3 dudes and 1 girl, Jewish girl by the name of Abby Ferry. She said, are you a podcast host? And I was like, no, I don't really get down like that. She said, you should be. She says, you're different from anyone we've ever had on our show. They heard that part of the conversation and they said, how are you getting interviewed, but also able to interview them? I said, I don't know. I come from a counseling background, so I'm used to asking questions and just kind of pulling more out of my clients. And I decided, okay, I guess I'm a podcast host now. And next thing you know, this guy who was, before I got my job, he was mentoring me. He used to be the head exec at Xerox. He went to run his own business, very successful 7-figure business. And he is a 5-time best-selling author. He says, hey, I want to be your first guest. So, Moose, I was very intimidated. I was just like, bro, I don't really know if I can do this. And so I said, can I read all 5 books? I'd never done a podcast interview before. And this is in the summer of 2020. I'm just like, okay. So I said, all right, let me figure something out, because he was a blogger. I said, I'm going to read his most recent blog post and build the episode around that. And when somebody blogs about something, they're hot under the collar about it.
Yeah.
Man, I started asking him certain questions. I couldn't get him to be quiet. And so he gave me his direct number. He says, why don't you call me in 20 minutes? I have some feedback for you. And I'm thinking, man, this dude is about to rip me 3 new ones. Because he's a Jewish man, he's about his business, very successful. And, they really are keen about how they spend their time. And I'm like, oh, man. He says, Jamal, I've done thousands of these interviews. And the interview I just did with you, I would put within my top 20. He says, kid, you're a natural. He says, you have something that is very rare. He said, you pull stuff out of me that no one's been able to pull out of me. He says, I'm going to sponsor your space at Simplecast so you can just the podcast. And I'm actually going to get you a mic so you have cleaner sound. And so it became evident to me, Moose, that I wasn't looking for Listen Then Speak. Like you may see behind me some of these big white Post-it notes with all the black writing. And I didn't vision board any of this. I wasn't looking for it. It was looking for me.
Yeah.
And that's when people kept coming to my DMs and said, hey, I heard your podcast. I saw a video that you posted on LinkedIn. Are you a mentor, advisor, counselor? And I still said no, but a guy who is one of my best friends, he's a dear atheist by the name of Billy Simone Salibi. He says, listen, I'm going to mentor you and just show you how to use this platform a little bit. He says, your title says global lead because that's what you do. I was working in investigations. He says, talk about who you are. He says, because when I interact with your content, I don't see a global lead. I see a public speaker, an advisor, a coach, a counselor. He said, that's what I see. Yeah. I put that in my thing, and man, I didn't even know what an inbound lead was back then because I was a W-2 worker most of my life. I'm in my 30s at this point. And bro, the floodgates just started opening.
That's amazing.
Fast forward a year into 2022, LinkedIn themselves brought me on the contract, and that just opened me up to a lot of corporate organizations that start bringing me in for firesides. And then from there, they said, I want you as my own executive coach. So there's my long-winded answer to your question.
Give a quick plug on your podcast, because your podcast is super successful, man. And I remember you mentioned it's one of the most downloaded podcasts in all of Apple Podcasts or something along those lines. Yeah, give a plug, man, because it's awesome.
Got it. So Listen Then Speak it started off just as a passion project. And now, once I began to niche down in 2021 on what my brand and what my message was and what I wanted to put out there, working in the area of stress and burnout, anxiety, and all those things, and I started to see a certain ICP that kept coming to the podcast, kept listening, and then kept coming on to hire me. I started to say, okay, I need to bring on successful entrepreneurs, business owners, CEOs, business moguls, and talk to them about the journey. But let me get the highs and the lows. I don't want the highlights. I want the red flag. I want the booth review. I want all that stuff. And because I come from a counseling background, there's a certain scripture I use in Proverbs. It says, the counsel in the heart of a man is deep, but a man of understanding will draw it out. I am that man of understanding that will draw out what other people aren't asking. People ask the boring stuff, and everybody's on, podcasts to push a product. That'll all be in the show notes, and we'll talk about that. But I don't care about what you do. Tell me who you are. That is a secret sauce to listen and speak. And that is how within less than 4 months, we got in the top 25%, but now we're in the top 1.5%. And we just hit yesterday 1.7 million global downloads, which is so crazy. Wow.
That's amazing, man. Congratulations. And dude, let me take your own advice here, right? Instead of talking about why it was so good, tell me about some of the struggles that you've had. Tell me how you've had to rebound from it.
Oh, bro, let's go there. Let's go there. So when you're that active on social media, people will come into DMs, people want to find you. And so my co-author, we met a few years ago. And from 2020 to 2024, every year was like, boom, 6 figures, 6 figures, 6 figures. I mean, we were like hitting it. And she said, you've had a lot of wins. And she said, you're a great storyteller because you're not telling stories. You're literally telling the truth of your life. She said, but I sense that you're going to have to learn how to lose. And I was like, Kristen, what do you mean? She says, you're going to have to learn how to have some fails. And she says, that's going to be what even writes your story and puts weight to it. And so in all brutal honesty, Moose, last year, I kind of got away from what made Jamal, just being really organic with my content. And, online is oversaturated right now. I can't even say saturated. And I started looking and looking at, oh, what's that person doing? What's this person doing? And how do I strategize instead of serving? Because ultimately I'm a servant. My services aren't cheap, but I undermarket and overdeliver. Mm-hmm. There are people who overmarket, and then you get their services, you're like, that's it.
Sucks. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a reason why I have over 90 recommendations and over 250 5-star reviews for my podcast and 90 for my services, because I'm good at what I do. But man, I end up hiring a con artist because I met them through a faith-based mastermind of all things. This person we actually both know. And my business went through a revenue drought for 9 months. I mean, I made this much. Yeah. And anything I made, it was stuff that I just did outside of it, because you're going to have multiple streams of income. But my goodness, man, I learned a lesson that when you work with someone, if you have a feeling in your gut, like, I think I should not do this, don't do it. Yeah. Don't do it. And so that was the fail of, like, one thing that has kept me safe. People say, you look really young for your age, is because I'm careful about the moves that I make. And I did not vet this person. I thought that I knew them. And instead of being kindness is a fruit of the spirit. I was being a nice guy. After 3 months of making no revenue, you just cut stuff off as a business owner. But a funny thing is, I work in Neuroplasticity. I work in all these things, but I'm keen to admit my own failures. I start stumbling in some of the very areas where I'm working with my clients, where it's just like, instead of being kind, and a kindness is, you know what, this isn't working out, we're going to just cut the contract here. And, legally I can, whatever. I was being nice, like, oh, well, let me just I don't think I want to hurt them. It's just like, Jamal, you're hurting yourself by saying you don't want to hurt them. And you're spending thousands of dollars. You're not making any money, and you're spending thousands of dollars, and they are pushing a subpar product. And, when stuff like that happens, one, you always want to take, I call it EO and R&R, extreme ownership and radical responsibility. It's like, Jamal, you are where you are today because you didn't cut them off. You are where you are today because, one, you didn't vet them. They don't even have a Google business page. Yeah. And I remember one of my mentors said, Jamal, there are people who touch millions, and then there are people who have millions. It's a big difference.
Gosh, so good. That's such a good quote. Jeez Louise. People who touch millions, and then people who have millions. Yeah.
So they were able to kind of put out an image of what they were touching. And somehow, because of what I met them, the mastermind I met them through, that engendered a trust that really had me fooled. And so that to date was the biggest failure that produced so much stress in me. And let me tell you, I'm down about 23 to 30 pounds, but last year I gained almost 40 pounds of weight through the stress. My prolactin and cortisol levels were through the roof. Yeah. And so it's made the brand and the business of Listen and Speak richer. You know, I'm not jaded or guarded, but I know how to guard my heart and do this the right ways. And going back to just I'm here to serve. And if you can afford those services, let's go.
Yeah. Dude, so how did you, when you went through that drought, right? You obviously went through a bad situation, probably through a situation that most people would have wrapped it up and said, hey, I'm done with the business, right? No revenue in. How did you keep going through it in the darkest of days with it?
Right. Two things, Moose. And I think you and I'm preaching to the choir with you. Before I left my corporate job, like I fully left everything right at the bottom of 2022. I had a 6-figure nest egg, very large nest egg saved up. You never go to run a business living in a city like DC, I would say New York, Chicago, California, wherever you are, or if you're in the UK, don't do that without having something built up to float you.
Yeah.
One, I had enough to float me. You know, I had money in investments, money in a high yield savings. I'm not going to go into the details, all that. Everybody don't need to know all that, but I had stuff to float me. But also think about what I just told you 10 minutes ago. I didn't start Listen and Speak. Listen and Speak was given to me literally by God. I know I have clients that are atheist, agnostic, universalist, Buddhist, Muslim, Jewish, you name it. It runs a gamut, but they all know who I am. And so because this thing didn't start with me, you know what I'm saying? I knew I can't just drop it like that because this was not my idea. It's something that I've been given by God to steward. So I was like, wait a minute, it can't just end like this. You know, This is a part of the story. I wouldn't have written it this way, but this is how it happened.
Yeah. Dude, I've been seeing this quote recently on TikTok videos, and I love this. And I wish that more entrepreneurs would see this, right? Every entrepreneur goes through what you're describing, where they go through highs and they go through lows, right? So many people, when they're going through the lows, they call it a wrap, right? But if they look externally from the business, right, the quote that I've been seeing is, okay, God, this time we build it the right this way. This time we build it together.
That's it. We're doing it together. For a year, I tried to do it on my own. And it's almost like that example of, you know, whether you believe in the Bible or not, people still read it. I can name you 8-figure Muslim high earners who read the Bible as their blueprint for their success. And we know Jesus said, he came to the disciples and said, what, they were toiling all night. And he says, cast the net on the other side of the boat. I was casting my net for the better part of a year on the wrong side of the boat. And I struggled as a result.
Yep. It's super interesting, dude. You know, I'm a Christian as well, right? I'm a Christian as well, but I feel like I have not I advocated my success enough for God recently. Now, this is 2 days in a row that this has been brought up, and this has been on my mind for the last 3 months. You know, I'm like, man, either he's getting ready to take it away, or I need to start saying, you know, it's because of you, you know. It's been heavy on my mind, so it's funny that we went this route.
The time to act on it is now.
You're so right, man. I think what's interesting with your story, right, is that you weren't looking for this, that it found you. One of my favorite entrepreneurs is Vince McMahon from the WWE.
I love that. That's crazy. He's unhinged. I love him.
Unhinged, right? And what I love about him is exactly what you just described. I think he's got an eye for talent that most people don't see. He's like, I'm going to build an entire brand around Jamal Marshall because he's an amazing person at podcasts like someone I've ever seen. You know what I mean? Now that you're a podcast host, have you ever found other people who are playing that role and you're like, yo, that person I need to build a brand around them. I need to put them on the podcast, etc.
When I see it, yes. And oftentimes it's usually when I see it, like, I don't know how to describe it, but like when people are coming to me and they want something from me, it's probably because, you know, you can go on Apple right now, go on the education category, you're going to see our podcast there. You can just go on, there's receipts. You know, people say we're ranked here. And it's like, well, can I actually look that up? You know, you're going to see where we rank. And so people look at that, or they look at the numbers and they think, well, I want something from Jamal. And that's not always the intention. Some people do want to collaborate. And so you want to be open to those ideas. But oftentimes when I see something in somebody, it's because God's given me the eyes to see, like, man, they got something special, you know? And I think that's when relationships are built more organically. Instead of you trying to force it, you cannot force a fit. I tried to do that before last year, and it just does not work on the giving or the receiving end.
with your clientele, do you have them? Do you help them build podcasts as well, or not necessarily on the podcast side?
That's not what I do with my clientele. My clientele are actually literally working through the beginning stages of, it could be trauma, it could be stress, burnout, it could be like this business or this corporate, me being a senior leader or me being in the C-suite with these other people that I don't trust. They're having to just navigate the workspace. Not to mention, you know, if I have someone who is a person of color, that's a whole nother layer. You know, psychology of Black and brown Americans is very different from psychology of Western Americans. I don't say that to fire shots, it's just the truth.
Yeah. Has the result of them working through the trauma ever been to stand out more on their podcast and create something like that?
That's funny. I can't mention names, obviously, under confidentiality, but I had one who actually left a very, very lucrative position to run their own podcast, and they're one of the most successful podcasters on the planet.
So cool.
They were able to save, I mean, where they were working at, if I told you, I don't want to even tell the organization, but let's just say they saved up a pretty large nest egg. They live in New York, of all places. So, and they went and it started out as a passion project, and they found a way to monetize it and to find a core audience. You know, you want to know who's your core audience, who's tuning in, and who's going to be, you know, a loyal buyer. Loyal listeners at some point will turn into loyal buyers if you know how to continue to have that conversation in a way that's organic.
Sure. That's amazing. Did you sort of help push them I don't want to say push, because I'm sure they ended up finding it on their own, right? But were you sort of like guiding them to go and do that stuff? With the way that you were found, I'm just curious, you know?
Yeah. I want to say this. They watched me and they were definitely inspired by, like, man, if you could work, because I've worked corporate, nonprofit, government, all of it, and now I run my own business. So it's like, you have experience in all four areas. If you can do this, I can do this. And so we actually did an extra phase of our work where we actually did just strictly entrepreneurial work. And I'll admit that was a little bit harder for me, you know, at the start, because this was years ago where I was used to just kind of working through the root causes of the subconscious, because everybody's looking at management. And my unique modality, so for y'all people who love to steal, I live in DC, and litigation, we will sue your pants, but it's to manage me.
Yeah.
A lot of people, and at times we also been told, mismanaging ourselves. Your business will grow to the degree that you do.
Gosh, so good.
Yeah, that's the area that I want that I'm a master in. You know, am I a master at building out systems and processes? Submaster. But if you want to, a lot of people, you have a lot of people who are even 8-figure earners who still have a poverty mindset, who still have a lack mindset. And so your personal development, I can't tell you how many multimillionaires and billionaires I've had on the podcast to say they don't cease to always work on their personal development. People want to know, how do I make the next buck? Invest in here and here.
Mm-hmm. What about, you said that you're not strong with systems and SOPs, right? But you have a team working behind you, don't you?
Yeah, that's why I have a team, because that's not my strong place. And I learned, this had to be the summer of 2021. My first episode, it wasn't the first, it was like the intro. I stayed up till 3:30 in the morning trying to produce that intro. And I was like, Jamal, hand it off. You're not a techie. I'm tech savvy, but I'm not a techie. It's just like, stop playing.
Yeah.
Bring a team, bring a design team, bring a production team for your podcast, for your website. Have a team that's doing, you know, the SEO and keeping track of who the mailing listens of. You can't do this. You don't have it.
Where I see a lot of entrepreneurs go wrong is they'll be like, I will not scale the org because I can't trust anybody else to do the work but myself. I'm curious, without you having the SOPs and the process built out, how did you throw that trust into a new team member so that you could hand it off?
I developed SOPs.
Gotcha.
I said I'm not a process person. That doesn't mean we don't have processes. No. Don't hear me wrong. So yeah, there are standard operating procedures. And, you know, I would say this, the kiss of death for an entrepreneur, hiring too quick. Don't hire too quick, but don't wait too long to hire. There's a fine line, and you got to find that dichotomy, and you'll find it through trial and error. And I 60% of my clients are women, but I'll say this, as for my guy clients and my guy people, prospects, whoever's listening, we love the trial. For us recovering perfectionists, we don't always like the error. Get used to the error. That's where you grow.
Yes, you're so accurate. I tell people all the time with Spear Rocket, right? I'm like, I cannot guarantee you that your virtual assistant, that your new hire is going to be amazing. And I've been in staffing for the last 8 years, even before I was with Sphere Rocket, right? I cannot tell you that when you purchase your new hire from me, they're going to be perfect. In fact, what I know is that it's not going to be perfect, right? But the way I can build the product can support the imperfectness, right? So when somebody's not the right fit, I can recommend them getting out of the business sooner than you probably would have identified on your own, right? I can recommend churning that person so that I can recruit in the background and find you a replacement. Have you ever had to let go of a team member?
Yeah.
How many?
I had to do that last year, just one. It just wasn't working out. It was a research intern, and I mean, they did what they could, but I needed more from them. And then, obviously, I'm an empath, as you can probably tell. I'm super intuitive. I'm like a male version of Jean Grey, which is a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because it makes me really good at what I do, a curse in that I feel everything. Because I feel everything, I maybe sometimes don't want people to feel bad, but, E.T., I love Eric Thomas. He always says, you got to remove
He's so good.
The business. You got to remove your emotions. And I kept her on too long, and it cost me far more than it was worth. So, and it was an amicable split. It wasn't like, we looking at each other sideways, but it's just like, I think I could have done without her.
Yeah. Dude, that's cool. You're a fan of E.T. I've been watching E.T. since 2012, man. I haven't even seen him doing stuff recently, so that's cool. What's the obviously you had the issue with the guy last year. We talked about that on a call, right? What's the biggest issue that you're running through today?
I think today the biggest thing is throughout 2025, something else that was out of my control was here in America. And again, I am super non-political for, your people. But a lot of budgets got switched around because of, the changes in the White House. And so, corporate budgets that were allocated a certain place, they got reallocated. And so, budget for, if I'm going in, is there a budget for this work? And so finding places that have, I'm in a different tax bracket, like these services don't come cheap. And so I think that's the biggest thing I'm facing today. And then, taking the time to do the market research to put out there a low entry digital product. There are people who say, hey, I can spend thousands to go one-on-one with you. And then there's people who want to spend like $17 to $47 just to kind of get a piece of your mind. And so that's the next step.
So a lot of your clientele, they're more on the B2B side when somebody comes from Amazon, like you had mentioned, right? Mm-hmm. It's usually Amazon who's paying for the cost of the therapy.
Yeah.
Got it.